The Apadana of Persepolis was a grand audience hall built in the ancient Persian capital under Darius the Great in 515 BC and later restored by Artaxerxes II. It served as a ceremonial space where representatives from across the vast Achaemenid Empire would gather to present tribute to the king. In Civilization VI, the Apadana provides the following bonuses: +2 slots for great works of any type, and +2 envoys whenever a wonder, including the Apadana, is built in the city. So, to explain these effects, we first need to take a closer look at the Apadana itself and its purpose. The Apadana was constructed at the height of the ancient Persian Empire, a period where its lands spanned from the slopes of the Himalaya to the Nile Delta and across Anatolia. But not all of this territory was ruled directly by the Persians. In fact, most of it was ruled by local rulers, who had to pay tribute to the Persian leader, named for that reason as the King of Kings. Greek historians of the time wrote about Persepolis, describing it as the richest city under the sun, and the Apadana is where much of that wealth was brought and presented, arriving from all across the known world as part of those tributes. The reliefs on the palace's southern staircases depict processions of subject nations of the Achaemenid Empire. Greek city-states, the Egyptians, Babylonians, and many other tributaries of the empire are shown bringing gifts to the Persian king. These gifts were the finest luxuries of the time, from intricate textiles to ornate jewelry. Civilization VI represents those lavish offerings as great works, which is a pretty fair abstraction in my opinion. To explain the second bonus, we first need to take a look at what envoys represent in Civilization VI. They more or less play the role of diplomatic influence, how major powers project their reach and assert control over smaller city-states. So, the more envoys you control, the bigger your prestige and power projection is. The bonus of the Apadana in-game basically ties those envoys to the splendor of your capital. So let's talk a little bit about Persepolis, the capital of the Achaemenid Empire during its golden age. The Apadana was likely the most impressive structure in the city, but it was far from the only one. It stood on the Persepolis terrace, alongside the Gate of All Nations, the Hall of 100 Columns, multiple palaces, and a vast royal treasury. Persepolis itself was, at the time, one of the most prosperous cities in the world, something that would have naturally inspired both admiration and loyalty among its many tributary states. I believe that the envoys that the game provides the player who owns the Apadana do a very good job at describing this connection between splendor and power projection. The more impressive your civilization appears, the more influence it can exert outwards. The wonder requires the political philosophy Civic. As I described in the previous segment, the enormous Achaemenid Empire, in its golden age, had a well-established political structure, where subject nations across its vast territories paid tribute to the King of Kings. The Persian kings would allow different cultures to exist under their imperial rule, keeping local governors in power, while the tribute-bearing delegations reinforced their loyalty to the central authority of the Persian Empire. The Apadana was fundamentally a representation of this form of governance, a central hall where all this wealth from faraway lands would be delivered and made visible. Political philosophy is an extremely broad term, but the Apadana definitely fits under its domain. It is, quite literally, an architectural expression of how imperial power was organized and sustained. The wonder must be built adjacent to a capital. It is quite clear that the Apadana was a representation of the central authority that was present in the old Persian capital of Persepolis. It could not exist and fulfill its role as an audience hall in any other city, so I believe the requirement is quite justified.
My ancestor Darius made this Apadana, but it was burnt down. By the grace of Ahura Mazda, Anahita, and Mithra, I reconstructed this Apadana.
The in-game quote comes from Artaxerxes II, referencing the reconstruction of the Apadana after it had been destroyed. Artaxerxes invokes deities of Zoroastrianism, such as Ahura Mazda, the sky god and the main deity, Anahita, the goddess of water and fertility, and Mithra, the god of the sun and friendship. Apadana started construction in 515 BC, under the orders of Darius the Great, and finished during the reign of Xerxes I. However, the palace was partly destroyed or decayed, and was rebuilt by Artaxerxes II in 359 BC, as referenced in the code. The Apadana was finally destroyed by Alexander the Great, when he ordered his army to burn and loot Persepolis. This guy just keeps popping up in these videos. Overall, the Apadana is a pretty elegant design. It ties together culture, diplomacy, and political authority into one wonder that reflects how the Achaemenid Empire actually functioned. It is a very nice example of how Civilization VI manages to capture historical facts in otherwise unassuming designs. Looking at the bonuses at a glance, they don't seem that especially thematic. But diving deeper into it, it is very satisfying how well the features of the wonder reflect the actual history of the ancient power that constructed it.